Welcome to this lecture on complex analysis. Today we are going to explore the fascinating world of limits and limit theorems in the complex plane. If you have studied basic calculus, you already know how limits work on a simple number line. But moving into the two-dimensional complex plane changes the rules entirely and opens up a beautiful new way of thinking. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what a complex limit is, how to calculate it, and why it forms the absolute bedrock of advanced physics and engineering. Let us dive right in. Let us start by imagining you are meeting a friend at a specific fountain in a large park. In a one-dimensional world, like walking down a narrow hallway, you can only approach your friend from two directions, the left or the right. If both paths lead to the exact same spot, you successfully meet. However, the complex plane is like the open park. You can approach the fountain from the north, south, east, west, or any spiraling path in between. For a limit to exist in complex analysis, every single one of these infinite possible paths must lead to the exact same destination. If even one path leads somewhere else, the limit simply does not exist. Now that we understand the idea of approaching from any direction, let us define this mathematically. We say that the limit of a complex function f of z as z approaches a specific point z0 is equal to a complex number w0. Conceptually, this means that for every tiny distance around our destination w0, there must exist a corresponding small distance around our starting point z0. You control how close the output gets by restricting how far the input can wander. In this formula, z is a complex variable, which is moving closer and closer to the target point z0. The function represents the mathematical rule transforming our input, and w0 is the final complex number that the outputs are getting closer to. If the limit exists, the output will always smoothly arrive at w0. Let us look at this visually to make it completely concrete. On the screen, you are seeing a diagram that perfectly illustrates complex limit path convergence. On the left side, we have the input space, the complex plane where our variable z lives. Notice the arrows coming in from all different directions, straight lines, curves, spirals, all converging onto our target point z0. The right side shows the output space. The mathematical function maps every path from the left plane into a corresponding path on the right plane. The crucial takeaway here is that no matter which of those infinite paths you take to reach z0 on the left, the resulting paths on the right all smoothly converge onto the exact same destination point, w0. The dashed circle represents the tiny distance epsilon, showing that the outputs are trapped close to the target. Seeing those paths converge is beautiful. But how do we actually calculate these limits in practice? To truly understand and evaluate them, we can break the complex function down into its real and imaginary parts. As you know, any complex number z can be written as x plus iy, where x is the real part and y is the imaginary part. Similarly, any complex function can be split into a real function u and an imaginary function v. Both of these are standard functions of two real variables, x and y. This separation is incredibly powerful. Why? Because it turns one potentially complicated complex limit into two standard real variable limits that you already know how to solve from basic calculus. This brings us to a fundamental theorem of complex limits. This equation states that the complex limit exists if and only if the two real limits on the right side both exist. Notice how the target point z0 has been split into its real coordinates, x0 and y0. If you can find the limit of the real part u and the limit of the imaginary part v as x and y approach their targets, you simply add them together with the imaginary unit I to get the final complex limit. This theorem is a massive relief because it proves that all the standard limit rules from basic calculus like adding, subtracting and multiplying limits also apply perfectly to complex numbers. Because we just saw that complex limits can be broken down into real limits, we can establish several helpful limit theorems. These theorems are shortcuts that make calculations much easier, saving us from having to use the complicated epsilon delta definition every single time. One of the most important of these rules is the sum theorem. The sum theorem simply states that the limit of a sum is the sum of the limits. This means you do not need to add complex functions together first and then take a difficult limit. Instead, you can take the easy limits of each function separately and just add the answers together at the end. Let us look at the mathematical formula for this. Here is the mathematical statement of the sum theorem. We suppose we have two complex functions, f of z and g of z. We already know their individual limits as z approaches z0. Let us call those individual limits L and M. We want to find the limit of their combined sum. This formula shows that the limit operation distributes over addition. Conceptually, this comes directly from the fact that the real and imaginary parts of these functions also follow the sum rule for real numbers. If the individual limits exist independently, you can just split the limit operation. Let us prove this step by step to see exactly how it works. Let us walk through the derivation of the sum theorem. We start with our initial expression, asking what happens to the sum of the two functions, f of z and g of z, as the input z gets infinitely close to the target point z0. To solve this, we use the definition of limits, which allows us to separate the terms as long as the individual limits exist. By applying the properties of limits, we distribute the limit operation to each function individually. This step is completely valid because we already established that the limits of f of z and g of z exist independently. We have now split this single limit into two separate, manageable limits. Continuing from our separated limits, the next step is incredibly straightforward. Now that the limit operation is applied to each function individually, we simply substitute the known limit values into the equation. We replace the first limit with its known value L and the second limit with its known value M. This gives the final result L plus M. This proves that you can take the easy limits first and just add the answers together at the end. The exact same logic applies to multiplication and division, provided the denominator's limit is not 0. Now that we have proven this theorem, let us see how to use it in a real example. Before we jump into our first example, we need to understand how to handle continuous functions. A simple polynomial function is continuous everywhere in the complex plane. This means it has no breaks, no holes, and no sharp corners. Because there are no fractions that could cause a division by 0 or square roots that could cause other mathematical errors, evaluating limits for these functions is very straightforward. For continuous functions, we can find the limit by simply substituting the target value directly into the function. Let us see this in action with a concrete example involving a complex polynomial. Here is our first example. We are asked to evaluate the limit of the polynomial function z squared plus 1 as z approaches the complex number 1 plus I. This is the initial setup of our problem. We are looking for the final destination of the function as the input gets closer and closer to the point 1 plus I. Because this is a simple polynomial, direct substitution is perfectly safe. Why? Because polynomials are continuous everywhere. So our first step is to replace every instance of the variable z with our target value, 1 plus I. This gives us the expression 1 plus I all squared plus 1. Moving to the next step, we now need to expand the squared term. We do this using the standard algebraic rule for a perfect square. A plus b squared equals a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. Applying this rule carefully to our complex numbers, the first term is 1 squared. The middle term becomes 2i, and the final term is I squared. We still have the plus 1 at the end. Next, we must remember the fundamental definition of the imaginary unit. By definition, I squared is exactly equal to -1. We substitute -1 in place of I squared in our equation. Notice that inside the parentheses, we now have a +1 and a -1. Finishing up our simplification, those two real numbers, +1 and -1, will cancel each other out completely. This cancellation leaves only the imaginary part, 2i, from the squared term. We also still have the +1 that was at the end of our original function. This leaves us with 2i plus 1. Finally, we just need to rearrange these terms into the standard format for complex numbers, writing the real part first, followed by the imaginary part. This gives us our final answer, 1 plus 2i. Physically, this tells us that as the input approaches 1 plus I from any direction whatsoever, the output smoothly approaches the point 1 plus 2i on the complex plane. We just saw a limit that worked perfectly. But what happens when things go wrong? Not all complex limits exist. Remember our park analogy from the beginning? The limit must be identical from every single infinite possible approach path. To see if a limit exists, we must test different paths approaching the target point. If we walk along one path and get one answer, but walk along a different path and get a different answer, the two paths disagree on the final destination. When this happens, the overall complex limit simply does not exist. This strict requirement makes complex limits much more rigid than real limits. Let us look at a classic example of a limit that fails to exist. To see this path dependence in action, let us look at a specific problem. We are asked to evaluate the limit of the function z conjugate divided by z as z approaches 0. The symbol z bar represents the complex conjugate, which flips the sign of the imaginary part. So, we rewrite the limit using the real and imaginary components, x and y. The numerator becomes x minus iy, and the denominator is x plus iy. We are approaching the origin, 0, 0. Let us test our first path by approaching the origin strictly along the horizontal real axis. On the real axis, the imaginary part y is exactly 0. So we substitute 0 for y in our fraction. This restricts our movement entirely to the horizontal axis. Continuing with our first path along the real axis, by setting y to 0, the terms containing y disappear entirely. The fraction simplifies to x divided by x. As long as x is not exactly 0, any number divided by itself is exactly 1. Because we are taking a limit as x approaches 0, x never actually equals 0. So we can safely cancel the x terms to get a constant value of 1. So along the real axis, the destination is 1. Now we must test a second path to see if it agrees. Let us approach the origin along the vertical imaginary axis. On this vertical path, the real part x is exactly 0. We substitute 0 for x in our original fraction. Now, evaluating our second path along the imaginary axis. Setting x to 0 makes the x terms vanish completely. This leaves a fraction that only contains the imaginary variable y, negative iy divided by positive iy. The I and the y terms cancel out perfectly from the top and the bottom. However, the negative sign in the numerator remains after the cancellation. This leaves us with a constant negative value of -1 for this specific path. Approaching along the imaginary axis gives us a limit of -1. Because +1 does not equal -1, the two paths disagree on the final destination. Since the destination changes depending on the path you take, this complex limit simply does not exist. You might be wondering why we care so much about whether a limit exists from every direction. Understanding complex limits is the absolute bedrock of advanced engineering and physics. Without limits, we cannot define the derivative of a complex function. Without derivatives, we cannot establish the Cauchy-Riemann equations. These equations are what make a function analytic, a property that guarantees the function behaves perfectly smoothly and has no sharp corners or breaks. In the real world, analytic functions are used to model two-dimensional fluid flow, like air moving over an airplane wing, or the invisible lines of force in an electromagnetic field. If your limits are not mathematically stable from every direction, your physical models will fall apart. Let us review the key takeaways from today's lecture. First, we learned that a complex limit exists if and only if all infinite possible approach paths lead to the exact same destination. Second, we discovered that we can break complex functions down into their real and imaginary parts, allowing us to use standard real variable limit rules. Third, we saw how limit theorems, such as the sum theorem, make evaluating continuous functions incredibly straightforward. Finally, we learned that if two different paths yield two different results, the limit fails to exist entirely. You have now covered the fundamental principles of complex limits, building a strong foundation for the rest of complex calculus. Great job!